Good evening, everyone. We will now get started with tonight's program series, sponsored by the University of Chicago Center for East Asian Studies. My name is Ariel Fox, and I'm an assistant professor of Chinese literature in the Department of East Asian Languages and Civilizations and the Committee on Theater and Performance Studies at the University of Chicago. For more information on the University of Chicago Center for East Asian Studies and the East Asia by the Book SEAS Author Talk series, please visit the SEAS website and subscribe to receive weekly outreach emails. These links will be provided in the chat box. Tonight's program is co-sponsored with the wonderful Seminary Co-op bookstores, the center's long-term partner and the country's first not-for-profit bookstores whose mission is bookselling. We are encouraging book sales for this event to be made through the Seminary Co-op. And although the stores remain closed to the public at this time, they are fulfilling orders through their website. We encourage viewers to visit their website and help support this unique cultural institution. Learn more about the Seminary Co-op by following the link being provided in the chat box. A link to tonight's book will also be made available in the chat box. Following the end of tonight's presentation, we will have a Q&A session. To ask a question to be addressed during tonight's Q&A portion of the program, please be sure to type in your questions into the Q&A box. So tonight we are joined by Rivi Handler-Spitz, Pauline C. Lee, and Han Saussi, the three editors of the Objectionable Li Zhi, Fiction, Criticism, and Dissent in Late Ming China, published by the University of Washington Press. They are also the editors of the 2016 volume, A Book to Burn and a Book to Keep Hidden, Collected Writings of Li Zhi, published by Columbia University Press. Rivi Handler-Spitz is Associate Professor in the Department of Asian Languages and Cultures at Macalester College, and she is finishing up a sabbatical at the National Humanities Center. Her monograph, Symptoms of an Unruly Age, Li Zhi and Cultures of Early Modernity, published by University of Washington Press in 2017, compares writings by Li Zhi to works by several of his best-known European contemporaries, including Shakespeare, Montaigne, and Cervantes. She is also a cartoonist whose drafts appeared in Inside Higher Ed, and most recently in the COVID Chronicles, a comics anthology published by Penn State University Press this year. Her current project is a work of graphic scholarship tentatively titled Contentious Conversations, Masters and Disciples in Pre-Modern China. Pauline C. Lee is Associate Professor of Chinese Religions and Cultures at St. Louis University, where she teaches East Asian religions and philosophy with courses in Chinese thought, Confucianism, Taoism, Buddhism, East Asian women and feminisms, Chinese civilization, world religions, and children's studies. Previous to her current position, she has taught at Santa Clara University and Washington University in St. Louis. Her first monograph, Li Zhi, Confucianism and the Virtue of Desire, published by State University of New York Press in 2012, examines the 16th century thinker Li Zhi and his views on the role of self-expression and desire in a good life. In the Journal of Chinese Religions, Dao, a journal of comparative philosophy, the Journal of Chinese Philosophy, and edited volumes on women and Chinese thought, she has published in areas of Chinese feminisms, space and place, Chinese conceptions of childhood, and comparative religions and philosophy. Han Saussi is University Professor at the University of Chicago. Professor Saussi holds multiple appointments in comparative literature, East Asian languages and civilizations, and the Committee on Social Thought. He is also a core faculty member in the Stavanovich Institute on the Formation of Knowledge. His research interests include Chinese thought and literature, semiotics, including linguistics, poetics, and rhetoric, narrative constructions of historiography, translation, literary theory, human rights, and global health. His primary teaching and research interests in classical Chinese poetry and commentary, literary theory, and the comparative study of oral traditions, problems of translation, and the ethics of medical care in resource-poor settings. They are joined today by Professor Ann Waltner, who will serve as their interlocutor. Professor Waltner is the chief of Party at the University of she specializes in Chinese history. She formerly University Institute for Advanced Study, a research institute, served as editor of the Journal of Asian Studies. She is published widely in both Chinese history and comparative history. Her website, Anjum of the Red Chamber, constructed in conjunction with the San Francisco Opera production of an opera based on the novel in 2016, will be published this summer as the University of Minnesota Library Online press book. So with that, Professor Weltner, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Ariel. My first question is perhaps an obvious one, and I'm going to ask it to all three of you. I guess I'll ask it first to Rivi. The question is, who is Li Zhi, and why is he objectionable?
Thank you, Anne, and thank you, Ariel, for the introductions. Li Zhi was known as an iconoclast, a hero, an eccentric, a heretic, a threat to public morals. He lived from 1527 to 1602, and he was a fearless social critic and a prolific writer of commentaries on Confucian classics, Buddhist classics, Taoist canons, history, philosophy, popular literature. He was an avid letter writer and a poet, a government official, and then he resigned in disgust. And he took up lodgings in a Buddhist monastery, which was unlicensed. He shaved off all his hair and grew his beard long. He cherished authenticity and expressing one's true self, no matter what the cost. He was an unsystematic thinker, a real kind of provocateur and a gadfly, a seeker who wouldn't accept any kind of orthodoxy or rule. And because he took such delight in exposing the hypocrisy of government officials and others, including even his own friends, he got the reputation of a real troublemaker. And he was attacked and he was clapped in prison, and his books were banned by the state and ordered to be burned, and he committed suicide in prison. But all of these things, his eagerness to speak truth to power and to expose hypocrisy in print publicly, all of these things only enhanced his reputation and further spread his fame as a thinker, but also a very objectionable character.
Pauline, what would you like to add to that?
I thought that he is all those things. He can't be cataloged. And so Rivi is like, as comprehensive as Rivi was, she is only getting us started too. It's many, many volumes of his work. He was many things and many times during his lifetime. Let's see if there's anything else I can add for now. I think he was a person who, there's things he just couldn't stand. Like he couldn't stand like two-facedness, or he couldn't stand hypocrisy. He couldn't stand people who weren't courageous, who were like cowardly or timid. And he couldn't, so there's all these things he couldn't bear. And I think that's partly what makes him objectionable and brilliant too. He couldn't stand it so much. And then he would make sure that you, who was reading him or around him, absolutely knew this too. And that makes him like this extraordinary person and thinker. And he was clear-sighted and had a vision, so he could see what he was aiming at, and he would be very clear what he was trying to communicate. So I think that's why he was brilliant and, as our title says, objectionable, difficult probably. He himself would call himself very difficult. Let's see if there's anything else I can add before Han will add more. He was writing in a time that celebrated individual subjectivity, and there's people who have called this like the period of feelings, the cult of feelings. And I think that he's also, let's see what other people think. I think he's one of the most powerful, he's part of that group, and he's one of the most powerful writers in terms of capturing images that communicated the importance of feelings in the individual. Yeah, so those are two more things about our guy.
Thank you. Han, do you have something to add?
Yes. Well, when this title was first being talked about, one of our number, Tim Brooke, looked at me and said, it doesn't go trippingly off the tongue. There's something wrong with the rhythm of it. The objectionable Li Zhi. And at first I thought, all right, yeah, he's right. This isn't a good title. But then the more I thought about it, the more I said, the fact that it doesn't go smoothly actually fits the subject, because if you love system, if you like the idea of a pattern of thought where all the pieces fit like a mosaic and contribute to a grander pattern, this might not be your guy, because he contradicts himself a lot. He certainly contradicts everybody else in his period. When people later on try to appropriate him and make him into the standard bearer for this or that other important idea, there's always something in his work that you can turn to that disavows that role of standard bearer. So he's kind of a counterexample to himself and to others all the time. Makes him fun to read and work with.
Yeah, thank you. Well, all three of you have talked about sort of how multifaceted he is. I really liked it when you said he's kind of a counterbalance to everything about himself. You've talked about the different kind of disciplines that he wrote in, although he wasn't aware he was writing in disciplines that are currently in use in the American Academy. And so what I'd like to ask Rivi now is if she would show the table of contents to the book. And then I think you've divided up who's going to talk a little bit about each part of the book. So Rivi, are you prepared to share your screen?
I am prepared to share my screen. I would actually just add a little bit. You were saying what Han said, and then what you were saying, Anne, about in this book, we have contributors from a number of different disciplines, history, religious studies, literature. And so we were trying to get at Li Zhi in a very multifaceted way. Li Zhi has almost been kind of a Rorschach test. People have seen in him whatever their proclivities lead them to see. And we wanted this book to be something of a kind of a kaleidoscope. Each chapter provides an angle, and then you sort of turn the kaleidoscope and see a different angle on Li Zhi. So let me just try to share my screen here. Okay, great. Is that shared? Yes?
It is.
Okay, great. So this is our cover. We'll talk more about that later. And well, yeah, oops.
I have to.
Okay, Han, would you tell us about part one?
Sure. Well, all the essays are extremely rich, so I'm going to be able to give only the briefest sort of categorization. But all right, authenticity and filiality. If you were going to talk to a Ming Dynasty elite man, one of the existential values by which they might define themselves is as a filial son. It was very important to people. It was in texts like the Xiao Jing and so on, it was seen as the cornerstone of ethics by official ideology. And this is one area where Li Zhi was not really a rebel, or at least his behavior was not particularly rebellious. He wrote one way, he might not necessarily behave that way, but he also, as Mara Epstein's article shows, he was very careful about how he positioned himself in relation to filiality and carrying out the authentic duties of a son.
Sorry, how did you, is that what you wanted to say?
Yes, that's basically what I wanted to say. Just a couple of sentences to introduce. This is
Great.
One of the places where Li Zhi comes polemically into contact with his era, but he's also not totally polemical. He's also kind of adapting to the existing discourse.
Thank you. Great. So I'm going to speak about the second part of the volume. The volume is in 5 parts, and we're just going to quickly speak, talking through them so that you get a sense of the contents of the book. And because my chapter appears in part 2, I will speak briefly about part 2, which is on friends and teachers. So friendship was a subject of great interest to late Ming intellectuals. And in Confucian thought, there are sort of these 5 cardinal relationships, of which the relationship between friends is often thought of as the least or the last, and it comes behind the relationship of ruler to ruled, father to son, husband to wife, an older brother to younger brother. But Li Zhi and many of his contemporaries reversed this ordering of the importance with which they viewed these 5 cardinal relationships. And they put particular stress or emphasis on this friend-friend relationship because of its voluntary nature. And so they saw it as sort of this relationship which allowed for the greatest degree of authentic self-expression. So in Martin Huang's essay chapter in the book, he examines Li Zhi's unfulfilled yearning to develop a kind of deep, intimate friendship. And in the chapter, Martin Huang also shows the predicament part, which is that despite Li Zhi's many efforts, he somehow managed to alienate all of the people that he was trying to befriend. Then in Timothy Brooks' chapter, he talks about Li Zhi took it as his responsibility to harshly rebuke and criticize his friends. The more he cared about them, the more harshly he would rebuke them. Particularly, Professor Brooke looks at this famous correspondence between Li Zhi and a very high-ranking official, Geng Dingxiang, whom Li Zhi publicly accused of hypocrisy and corruption and venality. And Professor Brooke really beautifully shows in this essay that underneath this criticism is this sort of deep caring, like I'm only criticizing you because I care so much about you. And the chapter also includes a really interesting discussion of the historical development of the postal system in Ming China and the ways in which letters accrued different meanings when they were addressed to individuals or made public as printed documents for an anonymous readership. And then my chapter talks about Li Zhi's relationships with his own teachers and students, and explores some of Li Zhi's theoretical writings on pedagogy and Li Zhi's efforts to goad his students into developing their own sense of personal judgment, not relying on the authoritative judgments of other people, teachers, and classical texts, and so on. So Pauline, would you like to talk about gender?
Manipulations of gender. So the book is organized, it first began as a conference many, many years ago, and it was at the University of Chicago. And then most of the people who presented were generously contributed chapters to this book. And then we also looked for a couple more because we wanted it from different disciplines. So religious studies, history, social economic history, literature, etc. And we also wanted different viewpoints on the same topic. So a lot of these sections are organized so that in this case, for example, Ying Zhang writes about, she approaches it as a social intellectual historian, and she looks at how Li Zhi tried to control his image in his writing. And the more he tried to control it, the less control he had until it became this complete disastrous chaos. And he developed this reputation of this image trouble, which was he was a neglectful husband or a licentious womanizer. And then in the chapter, which is my chapter, we look at it from the inside out instead of the outside in a way. And we're looking at the text itself, the many, many texts he's written, essays, poems, commentaries, and how he doesn't lose control, but in fact, in this case, you can see he has extraordinary, immense, masterful control over the text. And he uses that over the canon of Chinese literary tradition. And he uses that to set forth an agenda for social change.
Okay, Han, you want to talk about textual communities?
Sure. Well, both Kai-Ling Zhou and Jiang Wu talk about how Li Zhi is a participant in the huge publishing boom of the Ming Dynasty, right? Something that's received a lot of attention in recent years, but they look into the roles that his writing plays there. And Kai-Ling's chapter talks about this particular role of the Shishang, someone who is both a scholar official playing that role and also in some way a mercantile person, right? And so this is part of a movement that we see in China and Japan and Korea across the Ming and Qing eras, right? How the commercial world and the intellectual world begin to meld. And so that that explains many of the sometimes paradoxical things that Li Zhi has to say about officials. He censures them for behaving like merchants, like commercial people, at the same time as he says that commercial people are actually just fine. The difference between the two being one of hypocrisy, right? And so when you understand this as part of this new social position that has emerged for him at that time, it makes a different kind of sense. And in Jiang Wu's chapter, Li Zhi is known for having shaved his head and abandoned his role as Confucian in order to become a kind of an unorthodox lay Buddhist. He's always been criticized for this, partly by adherents of orthodoxy, but the Buddhists have not been entirely satisfied with the way he performed Buddhism. And so this analysis of his performance and his textual appropriation of Buddhist language illuminates the paradoxes of these seemingly conflicting roles that Li Zhi adopts. So there's something in these two chapters for everybody who's interested in the Ming publishing boom and what print did over a long period.
Thank you. Pauline, you want to talk
Yes,
about
so
afterlives?
the volume appropriately ends with a section on afterlives. And again, it's organized so Robert Hagel, he talks about, he's looking at how Li Zhi reads others and how they have, how the Ming fiction, they have afterlives through the commentary of Li Zhi. So he's studying their commentaries. And then Miao Fenlu, she studies it as an intellectual historian, and she's looking at how other people read Li Zhi through the many centuries from the late 16th century through even our contemporary times, and looking at the literature on Li Zhi and how it changes through time, and sort of leaving us with the question, what are we doing in our volume?
Thank you. Rivi, I think that most of us have probably seen the cover to the book. And I think that probably many of us do agree that the figure on the cover of the book, at least presents himself as objectionable. Can you tell us a little bit about the cover and the genesis of the cover, and then also talk a little bit more about the book and the production of the book?
Sure, yeah, thank you. So I just love this cover, and the image for it was suggested to me by my dear friend Li Yuhang. I was going to be giving a talk at the University of Wisconsin-Madison where she teaches, and I needed an image for a poster. And so I asked her, she's an art historian, and she said, well, what about this? It's not a picture of Li Zhi, but it does seem to capture his spirit. And it totally captivated my imagination. It's almost as if it truly were a portrait of Li Zhi. He's got his bald head and his long beard. He's clearly absorbed in a book, except that he's walking around and then his eyes are turned upward. He was known for giving his own sort of bizarre interpretations to what he read, which often deviated from canonical interpretation. So I can just see he's like thinking about how he's going to like deliberately misinterpret this text that he's reading. I wanted to give credit to our book designer, Katrina Noble, who put this exquisite typography over the image, and also to give credit to the artist Li Haiyang. His internet handle is Guanzhong Li Fengzi, and I'm not sure, but I suspect that this actually may be a self-portrait. And the reason why I suspect this is if you go to his website, and I'm adding this, none of the presenters know that I have this extra slide, but if you go to his website, you'll see this is actually a figure he paints again and again and again. So I just love his insuppressible kind of spirit that comes through in these paintings.
That's a great picture. You have to write another book now so we can use this for the cover.
Yeah, I also just wanted to give some thanks and to share the dedication to the book. The book is dedicated to sorry, it's the dedication is obscured on my screen.
Yeah, I can read it. It says,
Will you?
to provide, dedicated to provocative intellectuals the world over. So this might be like much of our audience here. In gratitude for the bold intellectual exchanges they engage in and inspire.
Thank you so much, Pauline. And also just to give thanks truly to the entire University of Washington Press. I can't name all the wonderful people that we have worked with, but especially to Laurie Hagman and Margaret Sullivan, who have just been with the project in wonderful ways for a long time. Beth Fugit as well, Nicole Bostic, Judith Hoover, I know you are here. Thank you for your extraordinary copy editing, and Cho Tian Feng. And then we also want to thank our corporate sponsors, the Geis Foundation, and Professor Joseph Allen, I think, is also perhaps among the attendees this evening. Joe and Lauren Allen, and then our universities and colleges also provided support. I also want to perhaps give Laurie a moment to talk about, if you could, the fact that this book is going to be made available as an open access book through a grant from the Geis Foundation. And I have a link. The University of Washington Press has made quite a number of their books available for open access at this website. Laurie, you want to say anything about that?
Sure.
Oh, great, thanks. This is the disembodied voice of editor Laurie Hagman.
Hi, nice to see everyone here. And I just wanted to say that one reason that I love this project is that so many of the people involved in it were authors that I had worked with before. So it's been like meeting old friends again. But just coincidentally, last week, we learned new exciting news from the Geis Foundation, because this book is part of a group of 10 books that Geis is supporting open access through. And we had experimented in recent years with making some of our previously published books available open access, but this, starting with a new one is a new and daring thing, and of course needs financial support. So this book is part of that initiative, and this particular volume will be available open access probably at the end of this year, the beginning of next year. Because it's brand new, we can't make it available immediately. And as Ariel mentioned, in the meantime, you can order it in a very affordable and attractive paperback edition from the Seminary Co-op, as well as from other places. But we always like to support physical bookstores if we can. So anyway, this book is part of a set of 10, kind of a pilot project with open access, and we're really excited for it to be available all over the world, because we've learned from the research that we've done on our initial experiments with open access that it really does make the books much more widely distributed. For example, one analysis that we did showed that of our open access books available on JSTOR compared to the ones that are also on JSTOR, but they're not fully open access. The open access ones were accessed via 123 different countries around the world, as opposed to only 21 countries for the ones that aren't open access. So this is especially important for books that are on international subjects. So this book will be available throughout Asia to, for example, to people who would have a hard time accessing the print edition, or who couldn't afford it. So this is very happy news. Thank you,
Laurie. Rivi, can you go back and show the cover again?
Oh, sure. Sorry. Absolutely. Yep. Oops. Oh, that's the cover of our next book and our following book. Okay.
I just have a couple of comments to make. I think I told this to Rivi, but I quite like the fact that the portrait of Li Zhi on the cover is not actually Li Zhi, because a lot of the fiction commentary by Li Zhuowu is not actually by Li Zhi. So there is a kind of a conscious duplicity in the cover that I think Li Zhi himself would have liked. And I do have to also call attention to the cat. I think that, you know, that Li Zhi is oblivious to the cat, and the cat is who knows what the cat is doing.
Well, there's also a kind of wonderful like self-dramatization. Clearly, this painter is very involved in self-dramatizing, and Li Zhi was always, you know, representing himself, playing with his physical appearance, and dramatizing himself in many ways.
Yes, yes. Well, I have a couple of questions, and then the questions from the audience have started coming in, and I will in a moment start asking them.
I'm gonna unshare my screen, okay?
Okay. Okay. Yes, you may share your screen. This is for Han. And the fact that we're doing this on May 4th is actually not an accident. There would have been many days in late April or May or early June we could have done this, and we picked May 4th. And so I guess I would like for you to talk a little bit about how you regard Li Zhi in the tradition of dissent. The dedication to the book sort of actually opens all of you up to the question, but I'm directing the question to you, Han.
Sure. Well, May 4th is today is the anniversary of the great student demonstration of 102 years ago. And it's always, you know, for the last 102 years, it's been a constant symbol of the desire to change culture, to change the relation of China with the other countries that have to do with it, to change the relation of people and state, to change the nature of literature, you know, everything that goes with the label May 4th. And Li Zhi has been invoked in that course of rebellious modernizing. As I say, sometimes, always imperfectly. He's not perfectly the poster boy for these causes, but he's the person who early on said things that needed to be said. For example, about the equality of women and men, about the moral similarity of intellectuals and merchants, right? About the necessity of intellectuals to do something practical in life that benefits people. And all of these turned out to be themes that were very important for the young people of 1919. So they were certainly not wrong to call on him as a predecessor. It's an important moment in the kind of inconsistent, spotty, and very interesting reception of Li Zhi. So what day better than May 4 to bring this up?
Yes. Thank you. That me about spent the last 2 days or that I think that the question of public and his public is extremely interesting. And I think the public finds its expression in several ways. I mean, one is in publishing. I mean, he was an extremely popular and successful author, and you know, publishing is public. But I was reading the collection of translations, and I think this was he showed up at a monastery and was mobbed by an angry mob, and I think at that time he had shaved his head, but he had a really ostentatious beard, and so you could tell by looking at him that he was rebelling against something. And it really interested me to think about, you know, in the late Ming, with, you know, no internet, no television, no telephones, that hundreds of people knew they were angry about him. And I mean, part of the reason they knew they were angry was his physical presentation of self. But I think it's an extremely, it's that his public persona and the degree to which it was indeed a public persona and not just something that a couple dozen literati wrote about in their letters is really very interesting. And so I see you're all nodding. So I guess I would like to hear people who spent more than 2 days thinking about Li Zhi comment on that.
Well, I think the angry mob was looking for Frankenstein, but they got into the wrong movie.
well, that's a pretty good answer. Pauline or Rivi, do you have anything to add?
I mean, there's some people in our group who would have a lot to say about. I mean, Ying Zhang comes to mind right away, and I will say that he did. I think he's objectionable. I mean, we keep on returning to the title of this book. He's objectionable, and I think that partly it was his personality and partly it was like cultivated. Like you do this kind of thing and then you get attention and then you can sort of push forward your cause. So there was something intentional about his the way he sort of presented himself too. Yeah. I mean, there's one thinking. I've been thinking about too, and I mean, I've been thinking about him since I wrote my dissertation on him. So it's been kind of a long time. But I've been thinking the last two, and because we were going to gather together, and it's like all these great Li Zhi scholars are going to be here. And I was like, who is Li Zhi like? And Han and Ruby can tell me if you agree with this. I was like, in our contemporary times, he's sort of like a Bernie Sanders kind of, like, I don't know if you agree or not, but there's this like prickliness about him, and it's like, yeah, but that's part of his public persona too.
Yeah.
You have something to add?
I'm not sure if he's like Bernie Sanders, but I have never thought about who today Li Zhi would be like. But I think Li Zhi, the mob, as far as I understand, was incited by Geng Dingxiang, the conservative politician who saw Li Zhi as a flashpoint of someone who was unleashing these powers of chaos. Li Zhi was very interesting. Pauline talks about this in her chapter. Li Zhi would read, he would read the classics of the Confucian tradition completely against the grain, and impose upon them meanings that went against the entire his canonical history of interpretation. And his daring to do that as a reader authorized other readers to do that, not only to the classics of the Confucian tradition, but also to his own works. And so he was, as my 8th grade French teacher called me, he was a stimulant of disruption. Because I was called a stimulant of disruption. Li Zhi was truly a stimulant of disruption. And I think that was part of the reason that the mob, attacked him.
Yeah, I mean, I think what all of you have said is really interesting. And what I'm actually interested in it is the way the circles of disruption went out and became a mob. I guess I have maybe one or two more things to say, and then we are actually getting questions. Another thing that I think is really interesting about him, and I guess this is this sort of has to do with the contradictions, is he's such an interesting blend of fame and notoriety. He is definitely objectionable for reasons that you've all articulated, but the Li Zhi commentaries, for example, show he has a kind of cachet. You put his name on books because the books sell. And I think that this combination is perhaps not shocking. I mean, notoriety does sell, but I think it's extremely interesting. And I think, I don't know, I I bravely said I could keep track of who was in the audience by the side. I didn't know there were going to be 94 of you. Actually,
Who are you looking for?
I'm looking for Bob Hagel.
Wait, yeah, he's here.
Yeah.
Bob is on the screen.
So I think I'm
Can you hear me?
yeah.
Well,
Hi, Bob.
the Liger course is not Liger at all.
Right.
It's somebody who appeared about a decade after Liger died and used this name. And it's been interesting to hear you all talk about him in general terms rather than the specifics of your essays, because the created Liger, the Liger, I should say, really had a lot in common with the real person. He was self-contradictory, and he was a little outrageous, and he certainly went off in areas that nobody else had done before. I mean, you know, if you look at the history of Chinese fiction commentary, it starts really with the Li Zhuowu commentaries. I mean, there were comments before then, but they were scattered and brief and nowhere near coherent in presenting any kind of particular image. So, you know, for me, I had two interests in this essay. One was finding more about the commentary, and secondly was to find out what people thought of Li Zhi. And of course, you know, publication in Ming China is not like publication that Laurie Hagman was talking about. Things are not instantaneously available all around the world. They're available in very small circles and limited places where the books happen to be printed or distributed to. And I expect that, you know, if you think of the novel at that stage of its development, it was not a mass reading form. It appealed to intellectuals. The language of these novels that have the Li Zhuowu commentary are quite demanding. A poor reader would have a difficult time with them. And so he's, you know, this fellow Ye Zhou is appealing to people like himself who had to do a little business, right, to get food on the table, and who was an intellectual with the Confucian training and so forth. And so it's interesting to see how what you all have said about Li Zhi seems to be reflected in the commentaries there by Ye Zhou looking at him sometime after Li Zhi's death.
Yeah, Bob, can I stretch your remarks a little bit in one direction and see if you agree or not? Could it be that the personality of Li Zhi, you know, this famously disruptive guy, somehow was a catalyst for the commentary on the novel as a genre, right? Somehow being able to speak as Li Zhi confers a kind of unity and single voice to what had hitherto just been scattered remarks. Could that be?
Well, that's an interesting idea. One of the questions I couldn't answer that you probably could is how widely known or how widely published Li Zhi's own comments on Shui Hu Zhuan really were. I mean, those are authentic as far as anyone can tell. He really wrote them, or at least parts of them. And his perspective is relatively outrageous, as everybody said at the time. How widely read that was, I don't know. But if it were, it would, as you say, Harm, have been a catalyst in all this. I think actually, from a more literary historical perspective, that earlier commentary was just so unsatisfactory and so thin in an age when commentary was attached to everything classical, to all kinds of poetry collections, essay collections. Everything came out with commentaries, and it was a big publishing appeal. You know, to present a novel with its title is one thing. To present a novel exactly in the same form, but advertised as having commentary, whether it had commentary or not, apparently was a commercial move of the late 16th century that was fairly common. So to put the commentary there and with a name attached that would provoke interest, I think was a commercial move as well as an intellectual move too.
Yeah. Yeah, there's also the comments on Sima Qian in Changshu that are very scandalous.
Mhm.
Yeah. So maybe that too is an ingredient in this authorial persona that people found very attractive to adopt.
Han, do you want to tell us what those scandalous comments are?
Well, this is some of this comes up in the Ming officials' reprimand to him, or the accusation drawn up against him, that he thought that Qin Shi Huang was the best emperor because he was the cruelest one, and that the widow who ran off with Sima Xiangru did the right thing, and that officials who changed their allegiance were just following nature or something, and basically riding his locomotive straight at the rickety edifice of practical ethics. And so clearly this was talked about, because the tenor of the accusation is to say this man's work is circulate underhanded, and it's scandalous in these ways. It's got to be suppressed.
Yeah, thank you. Joe Allen has a question about how do you separate the persona of Li Zhi from the historical Li Zhi, or do you?
Not very successfully, I would guess, but it's so hard to know. I mean, there are things that you can document, and there are things that are demonstrably false, right? That are demonstrably made up and falsely attributed. But I think there's a lot of gray. What do you all think, Pauline and Rivi?
Yeah, mine is the same response. It could be another chapter. I look at what is written and what is created on the text. I think Zhang Ying, I keep on pointing to Zhang Ying. I hope you don't mind, Zhang Ying. I think she does do a lot more with the social historical context and how other people describe him.
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, everyone. Yeah. I mean, I guess I can answer this first question as well about the public. I am a historian. I'm very, very worried about imagining the speed of transportation and communication as fast as ours. I try to kind of, imagine everything went slow and was limited and all that. But when I found this evidence of wide circulation pretty fast, or faster than I imagined, speed of circulation of his text, I was both excited and scared, because I could see how excited people were about his newly published works or reprinted stuff. And I could imagine, I was surprised that a mob could just act so fast. The book was published in Nanjing. He came back from Nanjing, the mob. I couldn't see the connection that appeared in my historical sources, because I imagined things would be slow, much slower. So that just shows that as historians, we try to imagine a world that's different from ours, like a foreign land, but sometimes they could be as familiar as things that happen around us. So that kind of addressed part of this question about how to, do we need to, art is different from the historical literature. And I think we are we're exploring both at the same time. And in my chapter, that's the problem I try to explore. Sort of, I think we have some evidence to partially reconstruct with some confidence either what happened or what he likely was trying to do to accomplish right? If he repeatedly said that, that's probably his goal. And I would take that as historical reality. And then I try to look at how his intention was with evidence misunderstood, either intentionally or unintentionally. And I try to understand why, and what was that, what's the implication of this kind of historical condition, and how he kind of operated in that. So I think this sort of, they could be very different in some cases. They could overlap. I mean, the persona and the historical Li Zhi could overlap, and they could be actually quite similar. And I would embrace all these three possibilities, and then actually turn this into interesting research questions for myself and maybe for others as well. So I hope I addressed that question.
That is a great question.
So it looks like Anne is having a computer problem. She disappeared, but we will try
You
to
can answer these questions, right?
as soon as she can. So why don't we look through the questions that we've received?
I can answer one of them. I can answer Tyler. Is Tyler, right? Tyler Bonnet's question.
Yeah, and I can address Ira Schiffer's question.
Okay.
Do you want to start, Pauline?
Sure. So Professor Bonnet asks, I wrote my master's thesis. Hi, it's Tyler. Hi, Tyler. I wrote my master's thesis on Li Zhi. De Bary famously called him the arch individualist. What do you guys think of this title? What kind of individualist is he? I think it's a great title. I like the title because I think it was provocative and got us thinking about that period, and Li Zhi as very interested in the individual and like what kind of individualist is he? And he's certainly not the kind of individualist from like our time and place. And I think part of it is I think of him as still a Confucian at the end of the day. He's like a wing school of which is a left-wing school of Confucianism. Li Zhi does, being a Russian, he cares very much about, I think, as much of an iconoclast as he is, as much as he's committed to dissent and like social change, he also takes and accepts, I think, tradition and culture, the sort of literary Chinese tradition that is given to him, that he was born into. And in that way, that's the one place where I don't find him like prickly and sort of like objectionable. It's almost like, this is what I have, and this is what I've been given. And now I'll use all these tools that I have. And he has an extraordinary number of tools, literary tools to change or extend or kind of hide in some cases, or bend or fold the Chinese tradition in order to create a different kind of social world. So I think in that way, he's a different kind of individualist who's committed to, who's looking at the individual within the social fabric. And I think it's a great question.
Yeah. I just add, the funny thing about talking about anything from pre-modern China in English is that our words have all these connotations and associations that sometimes get in the way. And, when you think of individualism in English, we're kind of thinking of, say, an Adam Smith sort of model of the self-interested individual and the way that that's carried on in the 19th and 20th centuries. And I think that wasn't even an imaginable possibility for a person in 16th, 17th century China. So we'd have to take it with a grain of salt, but recognizing that these are the limits of the language that we have to use.
Yeah, I don't know. I see many of our contributors are here, and I just want to invite them, if they have things to add to any of these answers, they should unmute themselves and make their voices heard, particularly giving time to the people who've not yet spoken, and also to invite any participants, any audience members, if you want to type a question into the Q&A box, please, we would be delighted to take questions.
And then,
in the meantime, I was just going to, we have another question. This is from Ira Schiffer. He says, why suicide? rather than exile to Li Zhi's native Fujian. So this is actually a question after my own heart. Li Zhi was threatened by the state and told that he was a threat to public morals, and that if he did not, that he was going to be arrested and taken back to his native province of Fujian. And he had a wonderful retort, which was, if I am a source of moral contamination and you move me where I am, province, it's just like the virus, right? Be spreading the contamination and spreading the infection to another place. So in fact, he was arrested, and as far as I know, he had no hope at that point of, well, actually, I should not say, I'm not sure if he had any hope of being actually repatriated or sent back to his native province. But in any case, he just slit his throat. He was a very old man at that time by contemporary standards, and he just he couldn't handle it anymore.
And then also he said too, I think, that he wanted to use this opportunity to make a statement. And what better way to make a statement than to basically write his ending with a knife, with a razor it was, and end his life in prison.
There's something that's been in my mind about the mob that we were talking about that I think deserves to be said. One of the things that catches people's attention about Li Zhi is what some have called his feminism. And as Pauline knows, it's not a very satisfactory feminism for contemporary people, but he did agree to educate women. And this was one of the things that was scandalous about him. And one of the accusations that I believe the Gung family used to stir up this mob was that he was doing immoral things with young women under the guise of teaching them philosophy and Buddhism, right? So if you want to raise an angry mob, just raise the woman question and it's going to happen, right?
Yeah, one of the texts that we translated in our volume that we three edited together, it was Han who translated this text, was the memorial submitted to the emperor accusing Li Zhi of these terrible immoral acts. And I don't remember the exact words, but it was something like, he entices the daughters of respectable families into the monastery to talk about the Dharma. And they bring their pillows and blankets, and they even bathe together in the monastery. And then it says the situation was out of control. So these were just some of the allegations against Li Zhi. We have another question here. In the question, it's a double question, the question about Li Zhi's reaction to criticism. Was he receptive to being censured by friends or foes in the same manner? And how did he respond? I would love to hear other people's responses to that. I would just say he took it as a provocation. He was fearless. He was not going to be cowed by anybody's criticism. And then does Li Zhi maintain a consistent rhetoric throughout his writing, or does it vary according to topic or genre? That would be interesting to hear people's responses to. His writings are shot through with irony and paradox and self-contradiction, as Han said earlier. But I don't know if any of our contributors or other editors want to address either of those questions.
With regard to the first one, I see Tim Brooke is here, and there's the letters between Gang Bingxiang and Li Zhi. And then is Li Zhi receptive to this criticism? Maybe Professor Brooke can tell us more.
Sure. Hi, Pauline. Hi, hi, Han. I've been coming in and out of this show because I live on an island and my bandwidth is lousy, but so far I'm online and you're online, so that's very nice. He set very high standards for himself and for his friends. So I think the best way I can kind of summarize his reaction to Gung's criticisms is I will accept your criticisms if they are clearly based on a truly dispassionate moral foundation. And if there's any hint of self-interest in your position, then your position crumbles and I will not hear your criticism. But if you can do it thoroughly, dispassionately, impartially, with the highest values of the culture in front of you while you do it, then I will accept your criticism. I will bow to your criticism. The trouble is most people never met that level. And so he felt badly about the mess that he and Geng Dingxiang got into, but he wouldn't really listen to Geng's criticisms because he felt Geng was not rising to his moral level. And if you didn't do that, there was no reason to concede any criticism that a friend is going to give you. So this also then goes back to the whole issue of friendship, that he placed friendship on such a high pedestal that it required the highest moral engagement of anyone declaring friendship. And if you fell short of that, then you weren't a friend and you wouldn't be treated as a friend. So he was very tough on others criticizing him, just as he was tough on them in letting them know what he felt. And in that regard, I guess he is a sort of an objectionable person, to go back to the title of the book.
So is the title okay now?
The title's fine.
And about rhetoric, I wonder, is Wai Li in the audience? Because there's someone who I think has a particularly sharp ear for rhetoric and style.
I don't see Yi, but I do see Maram Epstein, who may wish to say something about the May 4th connection to our book launch today, because that's something that Maram's essay chapter deals with quite explicitly.
Yeah, and Maram and Wai Li's essays were composed as a dialogue. Yeah.
Well, I would not want to channel Wai Li. Those are shoes that I would never be able to fill. But I will say that the May 4th reception of Li Zhi was that they completely misread him, as they did everyone else, and used him for their own political purposes. And claimed him as the bad boy rebel avant le temps. So a lot of the reputation that he has now, where he is not placed within the margins of the Confucian canon, but being completely outside, it comes out of May 4th misreadings.
Yeah, and there's a Maoist misreading that takes that and multiplies it by, some very high factor, because there was this moment when people didn't know what kind of philosophy would be acceptable. And so at one point it was the legalists, and then Li Zhi sort of began to look acceptable, and everybody immediately went to writing pamphlets about how wonderful Li Zhi was, and it was crazy.
One of the essays, well, I liked all of the essays in the book, but one of the essays that I really liked in the book was Zhou Kairu's essay, in which he portrayed Li Zhi as a mercantile scholar, and I never really thought of it in that way, but I think one of the things that essay did is it really did place it placed Li Zhi kind of in the center of what's happening in the my audio is muffled.
We can hear you.
We hear you very clearly. Yeah.
We see your head, but we hear you fine.
Okay. Some people are saying I'm muffled, and some
it sounds muffled to me too. And if you turn off your video, it might help your audio.
Yes, I'll turn off my video. Does that help?
Not to me, but, and just ask your question, that's fine.
I'm not on my own computer, so I don't know what anyway, I think that one of the interesting things about that essay, and I think also about several of the other essays, were the ways in which Li Zhi is placed so squarely in the center of what's happening in late Ming society. And he's squarely in the center of what's happening in late Ming society, but he's sort of always positioning himself as this objectionable, obstreperous outsider. And that strikes me as very, very interesting. We have a question from Samuel Koo saying, why did Li Zhi feel the need to take on so many personas throughout his life? Do you think these personas were poses or real commitments? And which of these personas, if any, do you think is a real Li Zhi? For example, was he really a Confucian deep down?
That seems like a question. I'm not sure if Jiang Wu wants to address that. Actually, Zhao Kaiwing also might have something to say about that issue, because those two essays both talk about Li Zhi's commitments outside of us, or related to and beyond a Confucian persona.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. I think this kind of a portrait of Li Zhi as someone who's descent of the Confucian culture is going a little bit overboard. And just like I think what has been said, Li Zhi actually is in the center of what's happening at the time. So I call him the Shishang writer and a Shishang thinker. Because,
mercantile literati.
Yeah, mercantile literati, Shishang. And I think he actually exemplifies what was going on at the time. And that is, at the same time, he was actually an official, ex-official, but at the same time, he depended on writing for publishers, even though he did not really acknowledge it. But in reality, I mean, he gets something from that, both reputation, but also I think substantial, not necessarily substantial, but some kind of a income from the publisher. Now, we do not know, this is speculation, because as I suggest, this mercantile literati, they don't identify themselves as with the merchants. They identify themselves as the shi. So as a shi, then you don't want to tell people how you make money. But responding earlier to this question about individualism, and in my essay, I argue that Li Zhi was actually putting forth a ethics of the mercantile literati, which put the individual in the center of a network of relationship. So yes, the individual is important, but it's not in the sense of like the Western liberalism or individualism. But that's why I use Foucault's idea of care of the self. You care about yourself, but in caring about yourself, you also care about your friends, your relatives, right? Your material benefits. So, so I think Li Zhi is exceptional in articulating that kind of ethics for the Shishang, the mercantile literati. So that's why he's at the center. Not only talking about, he experienced it, he actually doing that. He himself was not just, he had one foot, he used one foot in the bureaucracy. And after he retired, of course, he stepped away from that. And then he put one foot in the religion, right? In the cloister. And then, but he continued to embrace mundane world, like the civil service examination, commercials, publishing, and the mercantile literati, I mean the mercantile activities. So he was at the center, and publishing was very important to people like him. because not only he can articulate himself, he can put up all kinds of personas, right, for readers to guess, to speculate, and to appreciate. But at the same time, I think this is also how he kind of worked out his maybe contradictions, tensions in his thinking.
Thank you. Am I more audible now?
A little bit better.
If I may, I want to follow up with Professor Zhou's remarks, because our paper have been grouped together, right? So I'm right next to Professor Zhou's paper. I mean, this question is great. I mean, the conversation is so fun. We have lots of topics, mobs, women, you know, objection, beautiful, interesting painting. But my assignment is actually much simpler. I think I agree with all of your characterization about this figure. My goal is to look at him through religion, right? So Professor Zhou also mentioned he has a foot in religion. So then that becomes really interesting, because while you guys talk about so many misconceptions about him in the field of religious, I mean, history, right? There are Buddhist, Taoist, whatever, their history being compiled, Li Zhi wasn't there, right? So he wasn't remembered as a significant figure in religious history, Buddhist history either. One of the reasons is because during his time, he lived in a time before 1700, 1600, then there's a kind of a gap between him as the celebrity during that day and the Buddhist world, which was not revived yet. So the eminent monks, for those of you who know a little bit, for eminent monks, they were much more kind of a later phenomenon, right? So he wasn't at the time can find a competitive kind of a pair monk he can dialogue with. So it's nobody. There are some monks, he lived in a monastery, of course, but you can expect they were not actually up to his intellectual kind of a caliber. So put that together, he wasn't very much remembered in religious history. There's no record. People people actually accuse him of crazy Zen, right? Huangshan, right? So that's the only thing remembered. Actually, you see people refer to that, but nobody mentioned Li Zhi, right? Nobody mentioned Li Zhi. So I think that raises a very interesting question. Doesn't mean he wasn't important, because you can see here, he predates all the religious revivals later in the Ming Dynasty. Actually started lots of activities through his own reading and writing. So this is my paper about, I try to look at this through his reading life, reading and writing. So then things start to become very interesting, because he, as I said, Buddhism wasn't revived. Then his approach is really revive this out of his own imagination, right? Based on his reading and writing. So he recorded sayings, Yulu, for example, right? And also chronological of lamp transmission, all of this. And that inference still lingering in the Buddhist world, then we can see that actually foreshadow the later revival of Buddhism. So that's my kind of a perspective. And then coming back to this question, who he really is. So that's pretty interesting. A lot of you already said very good things about this. But from my view, I actually, in my paper, this is not in the title of my paper. However, I try to identify Li Zhi belongs to somehow a marginal group in Chinese history. I call the Dao learners, basically 学道人. So let's say in Chinese, probably it's much easier to kind of people who learn, study Dao. I don't want to use students or scholars. Very often in history, Chinese Buddhism, you see that translated as student and scholar, but actually not. So here we're talking about a group of people similar to Li Zhi. Li Zhi wasn't alone, by the way. So that's my point. He represented a group of people who actually were quite marginalized in the society. I know Professor Zhou mentioned he was the center, but that meaning of the center has to be approached from periphery. So he was at the periphery, lots of established structure. And because he represent or cut across so many different establishments sitting at the periphery, and then suddenly he became center. So this is very interesting interplay between center and the periphery. That makes him so important and interesting. And this category, I would call Dao learners, right? People try to learn the way, practice way. They situated right at the margin, but however, they generated lots of creative ideas. That's the importance of Li Zhi from the history of religion, right? As far as I can see. And their spirituality or religiosity, as I indicated in the title of this article, it's what I call that textual spirituality. It's based on text, based on reading and writing, and reinforced by reading and writing activities, without which you just cannot have any spiritual union, right? The experience of the way, the ultimate truth, for example, that's nothing can exist outside this textual realm, right? Basically, he created this textual realm so carefully, then he can talk about so many different things. Religion is part of that. Right? So that's just my thought. Yes. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you. Am I audible now?
Yeah.
Oh, but I've ceased to be visible. All right. We're almost out of time, but Paul Golden had an interesting comment in the concept of friendship as an elective affinity, and he's suggesting that the ways in which we have talked about Li Zhi and friendship is quite different from earlier ideas of friendship. He says there's material on friendship in classical Confucianism, but the ideas are it's the only cardinal relationship with an equal, and you have to think about what you owe your friend since it's not obvious. And so he's curious to know whether this is a difference between Li Zhi and mainstream values, or whether it's a difference between Ming ideas of friendship and earlier ideas. And then he says, remember, this is a question from an early China specialist, not a Ming specialist. We don't have very much time. I've been told that we have a hard end at 6:30. We may just get completely shut off at 6:30. So I guess the question is, are Li Zhi's ideas about friendship eccentric for the Ming Dynasty?
Could I add one sentence? You asked me to unmute.
Hi, Paul.
Hi, everybody. I'm fascinated by all this, partly because I know so little about it. This doesn't strike me necessarily as a conflict, but a potentially interesting, subtle difference of emphasis. So I'm not saying that in earlier Confucianism, there isn't the idea that you can choose your friends, but that's not the main emphasis. The main emphasis is that it's the only relationship you have with an equal. Every other relationship with your life is with a superior or an inferior. And here my ears are perking up. It sounds like the idea is you get to choose your friends, and that's what makes. So I'm wondering, is this a difference in the culture, or is this something about Li Zhi that stands out?
My 10-second answer is, I don't think it's that different from the early conception. Like Li Zhi choice aspect also talks about the equality aspect. So that was like one of the first essays I ever translated on Li Zhi, which was looking at spousal relationships and thinking of them as friendships instead and as equal. I think there's both. Was there something? Yeah.
My 10-second answer would be that Li Zhi, oddly, or perhaps not so oddly, is actually not so out of step with other thinkers on friendship from the late Ming. And indeed, there's been a bit of scholarship on this now, that Li Zhi's understanding of actually was out of step with his day and his views on many things, but in his view on friendship, he was actually quite mainstream, which may have put him at odds with a tradition of thinking about friendship, but for his own time period, he was actually articulating
I was going to add another piece of side evidence is that when Matteo Ricci came to China trying to win friends and influence people, his first publication to have wide circulation was a little pamphlet on friendship. and everybody loved it, right? It's the and he was very strategic in how he chose his themes, so it was in the air.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then Paul, there's also Martin Huang's not here, but he writes his chapter, and then he has a book on friendship in this period.
Earlier, I said Li Zhi was in the center. I don't mean he's in the center as an individual. He's in the center of the group of the mercantile literati. And the ethics of the mercantile literati emphasize equality because it's outside the family, outside the kingdom. That's why he black history. If you look at social history, there was this kind of public culture developing, what I call public culture, the organization, auto-organizations. You have, in fact, many professions like doctors, they're organizing, in the community, association, the meeting, exchanging ideas. So their relationship are based on equality, like the Jiangxue, those people, they call themselves like the organized 文社, 社友, right? As a 社友, of course, you are just not, you are not relatives. So you are on an equal basis. So that's why Li Zhi is at the center of the mercantile literati as an individual. A lot of his ideas in that sense is not really exceptional, but he exemplifies. And his life exemplify those ideas and values. Okay.
Yeah, if I can add just one remark, our late colleague Tetsuo Najita has a beautiful book, Visions of Virtue in Tokugawa, Japan, which is about a kind of a mercantile intellectual movement there. And there must be some commonality with Li Zhi, although I don't think he traces that particularly.
Well, it looks like I vanished again. I hesitate to blame the ghost of Li Zhi for my technological difficulties, but it could be true. I want to thank everyone. I want to thank everyone who came. I want to thank the panelists. I want to thank the contributors for writing a really interesting and stimulating book on an interesting and stimulating and provocative man. I do apologize for my technical difficulties. I has logged thousands of hours on Zoom with not a single difficulty, but tonight there seems to be difficulties.
I think Li Zhi is playing tricks on us, Anne.
At some point I must have said something that offended him.
It's easy to do.
The objectionable Anne Weltner.
Our next book.
Any one of a number of things I've said in the last 48 hours that would have offended him. So Ariel, I'm going to turn the floor over to you now.
Okay, thank you. So thank you all for joining us this evening. We hope that you enjoyed tonight's program. How could you not? It was fabulous and rich, much like the book itself. Please join the Center for East Asian Studies, the next installment of East Asia by the Book, CEA's Author Talks, taking place on Tuesday, May 11th at 6 p.m. Central, featuring the University of Wisconsin-Madison's Yuhang Li, who we have to thank for the incredible cover of this book, as we learned, and who will be discussing her wonderful new book, Becoming Guanyin, Artistic Devotion of Buddhist Women in Late Imperial China. For more information on this event and other upcoming book talks that are part of this series, please visit the links being placed in the chat box. Thank you again and have a wonderful evening.